Hello, havoc wreakers, and welcome back to our little dose of hope every week. If you're just joining us, I'm Lauren Shippen, creator of 2000 and Late, and in an effort to balance out all the shitty stuff the audio drama tackles, I talked with some incredible artists, creators, and activists who are grappling with our twisted reality and doing hella cool stuff to counteract the bad. This week, I am completely honored to be talking with Jenny Pizer, Senior Director of Strategic Initiatives and Special Counsel to the CEO at Lambda Legal. If you're not familiar with their work, Lambda Legal is a civil rights organization focused on furthering the rights of LGBTQ plus people through impact litigation, education, and public policy work. Jenny is an extraordinary person who has dedicated her life and career to improving society for people like us, like so many of the people who worked on this show. And we talk about all the different ways to get at making things better and the challenges that we face in doing so. I hope you enjoy my chat with Jenny as much as I enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Jenny, for joining me today. I'm so excited to talk to you about your work.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Delighted.
So activism can take so many different forms, and I'm curious what made you want to pursue advocacy through the law specifically?
Yeah, well, I'm a bit of a student of history, and in our country, civil rights advocacy in the courts has been one of the ways to really achieve profound change. Whenever you're trying to win change for a minority group that's more vulnerable in the political process, you can look to the courts, and it depends on the court system you have. It depends who's on the bench and what the overall environment is that you're in. But the rules, when they're followed, and they're not always followed, is that you can make an argument. And in civil rights advocacy, we make an argument about justice and injustice that exists and why that injustice is not compatible with our core, founding principles of liberty and equality and democratic participation. Those are promises that have been recognized sometimes more in the breach than in the honoring of them in our history, but they're touchstones. And for a minority group, which LGBTQ plus people, we're a minority for sure, and have been often disempowered in the political process and in other environments. But in court, at least the rule is supposed to be that if I go to court, I file a complaint on behalf of a person or an organization or whomever, and I articulate an injustice and I have my evidence, I'm supposed to get a response from the other side. Whereas sometimes in the political process or in society at large, in the marketplace, I can just be ignored.
Right.
And sometimes the response is not meaningful and sometimes the rules are not applied, but at least you get an answer. And, I feel like I was inspired, and I was inspired in some of my earlier research about women advocates who were advocating for women's health or protection or participation, and not just in the U.S., but in the U.K. and in earlier times, and using the arena or the theater or the forum, whatever you want to call it, but a public space to call out an injustice and make an argument. And I was very inspired about that. So it seemed like a good way to try to participate and speak out on issues. I mean, I certainly had a lot of opinions about what is just and not just, and some of that came from my folks. And so there are many ways to make a difference, and the moment we're in now is a great example of that. But legal advocacy in our country, in the U.S., has been an important component, not the only thing, but an important component of advocating for positive change.
And I think it's safe to say that we have had a lot of positive change in your time at Lambda Legal. Obviously, gay marriage becoming legal in this country is something that I think I forget sometimes how recent it really was in the grand scheme of things. That's obviously one of the big victories. But what are some other victories that people might not know about that you have experienced in your time at Lambda Legal?
Yeah, well, and I actually count my time at Lambda Legal as starting even earlier, at risk of revealing that I've been around for a very long time. I was a law student intern at Lambda Legal in the mid 80s. And
Oh, wow.
so that was formative in, incredible ways because, men who have sex with men, gay men, bisexual men, were dying, and
Right.
it was terrifying. I was there in New York City um, and in other major cities where previously where there had been a large community of men finding each other and having sexual liberation. Then this disease was just taking people at a rate that was terrifying, and it was a period where the government was absolutely not interested in helping. And some public figures, I'm thinking specifically about some folks who self identified as religious leaders on the
Mm,
far right, were blaming men for this terrible plague in a way that was so cruel and so um, you know convenient or serving their own purposes
right.
to do that. And at that time, another thing that I saw that on the positive side was that where previously uh, the the men's part of the movement and the women's part of the movement were pretty separate. I mean, there were
Sure.
know, women, lesbians wanting to have lesbian land and
Hmm.
create, a feminist space where women could really be respected and have control over our lives, and sometimes, having raised children, and men were doing other things, and sometimes there was tension and even hostility,
Mm,
between women and men. But often there were different goals for the law and for social and political change, and AIDS and other things. But AIDS in particular caused people to come together
mm,
across this gender divide, and a lot of this I'm talking about cisgender folks, but also more recognition of trans folks and the types of variety that we have within our broadly defined community. And that was a fundamental and incredibly important change. I mean, it was
yeah.
wrought by devastating tragedy. But, I think of that time and I think about where we are now in terms of having medications that are largely available to manage
Yeah.
HIV, and the social and political changes in the bigger landscape. I mean, another issue that is sort of related to what I'm talking about, but one of the two things that I think have changed a lot that I hope people can appreciate. So one is the pushback that we've been able to provide to religious objections to treating LGBTQ plus people,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean it's still an issue for sure, and it's an issue that so much of our hospital infrastructure is controlled by Catholic ethical directives, religious
Mm,
ethical directives that put limits on the types of basic, important, standard care that can be provided there. So I'm not trying to suggest that everything is taken care of. It isn't.
sure.
You know, but
Yeah.
but it was quite commonplace for healthcare providers to refuse to provide care for all sorts of things to somebody that they knew or suspected was an LGBTQ plus person.
Oh,
And so that's an issue that we litigated. And I think and it was, what the argument we were making legally about how discrimination laws work and when religious objections are acceptable and when they're not was completely in harmony with the medical establishment, the AMA ethical principles and
right.
other sort of core principles that are supposed to guide licensed medical care, but often was disregarded, and I think there was a widespread you know failure to understand what the rules are. I mean, when people understand what the rules are, most people conform their conduct to what the rules are, and especially
Right.
rules about what's harmful to other people. So I think, the other thing I would spotlight that I think is incredibly important is that we've been able to protect the rights of students to
Mm,
organize and have what we now call gender and sexuality alliances, what first were gay straight alliances, right?
yeah.
So student clubs at whatever level of school, uh, to meet and have support each other, and not just, the queer kids, but all kids who are interested in these topics and want to support each other. Um,
I love
it's
that.
just made a huge difference. It's made a
Yeah.
huge difference.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, yeah, being a member of the GSA and in my high school, and I hadn't quite figured out that I was bisexual yet, but I knew I wanted to kind of be in that space, and it was me and four other kids. Like it was a very very small group, but just knowing that it was there was, I think, really encouraging, and that's something that I wouldn't have thought of necessarily as a piece of this larger tapestry of LGBTQ advocacy. But of course, like that's so important. And I think speaks to like the variety of issues that you're often approaching. And you also, mentioned the sometimes hostile or at cross purposes dynamic between certain, specific groups within the larger community. How do you square when there's lots of different priorities, maybe even conflicting priorities? And how do you know, especially in our current moment when there's so many attacks coming at us, sort of which path needs to be pursued first? Is there kind of like a triage process for you guys?
Yeah, well, I can't tell you all our secrets.
Sure, nor would I expect you to.
But, so Lambda Legal is an impact advocacy organization. We're not legal services.
Mm,
And so that what you just said is absolutely true. And it's among the hardest things. I mean, there are a lot of hard things about this work, but that's one of them. There are so many needs and different ideas about what's the best strategy. People have different perspectives. That's really important. We always are trying to not have groupthink, to have a mix of different perspectives and ideas,
hmm.
people bringing their life experience and their professional experience. So we get the best ideas on the table, and we discuss and we try to figure these things out together. You know, Sometimes what I say is, well, the most important issue is the issue that's affecting you right now.
Mm,
And the most important issue affecting my neighbor is the one that's affecting my neighbor right now. Because who we are, people can object to who we are and our full participation or ability to receive what we should receive. You know, we, we can be denied at any moment. I mean, I think one of the
right.
hard things, and obviously it's not just true for LGBTQ plus people, it's for anyone in a more vulnerable minority group. And there's lots of types of, I mean, we're a society made up of people who are have all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of reasons that at this moment in this place you might be vulnerable and not know. So
Mm,
I think it's among the things that social science researchers have studied and confirmed that living with anxiety and fear has health consequences. And I
right.
mention that just because the moment that we're living in is one, and we may talk about it a little bit more, but where anxiety and fear, uncertainty are pervasive for so many different types of people right now.
Yeah.
So as lawyers, we are looking to strategically advance the law to protect as many people as we can. So when we look at a particular case, we're looking at what's the issue, who's the person or group that's affected, is this something where we have legal tools?
Mm,
Is there an identifiable legal right or protection of some kind that's being violated? Is it something that should be protected, but based on the state of the law right now, there's a couple missing pieces to get us
mm,
to a place where we could make that argument successfully. And, the courts certainly vary, laws vary state to state and region by region. We have a state court system, we have a federal court system. There's a lot of variety in the types of rights and protections that people have. I know this is kind of obvious today because the divergence in law in different parts of the country is quite dramatic. So
yeah.
kind of depends where you are. We always think about some of the issues that are quite hurtful and really damaging for people are affecting people who are not in a great position to fight back
Right.
because of the circumstances of their life. So as a lawyer, as an advocate, I always am looking at, is this an issue affecting a lot of people? Is it the proposal I'm looking at, the request to provide help, is it something where going to court on behalf of this person, there's a decent likelihood to succeed? If
Hmm.
we didn't succeed, is it such a powerful wrong that we might nonetheless accomplish important change by bringing that story forward. Now, I'm always hesitant to build a wall of negative legal precedent,
Sure.
just losing a lot just kind of can reinforce the idea that we deserve to lose. So
Right.
it's not, I'm careful about that. But, I think in this country, there's a lot of awareness, and Lambda Legal engages a lot in courtroom advocacy.
Hmm.
But we also are advocates in legislative and administrative arenas, and in front of a city council or a state legislature or some other decision-making body, and even sometimes to decision makers in the private sector, where there's the ability to change a rule that would affect a lot of people. And
Hmm.
sometimes it looks like we would have a decent chance to change a rule legislatively or advocating to a governor or some commission rather than challenging it in court. So what's going to work? What's the problem? Is it important? Is it affecting a lot of people? What's going to work?
Yeah, pulling any lever that you can to get where you want to go. Is there, this question might not have an answer, but is there any case that you can think of where the lever that you pulled, the law on the books that maybe was obscure, was kind of a roundabout way to get at what you were going? Like, can you think of sort of the most creative way you've gotten to the argument that you've wanted to make?
Well, I think there's probably a lot of examples of that. I mean, we're aiming to move and change the law. So it always means that we have to envision, what do we think the rule, what should it be, and how
Hmm.
might we get there? But I'll give you an example that I can't take credit for this, but that I think it's kind of delicious. We're talking about GSAs, about the rights of
Hmm.
student groups to organize. And one of the arguments is the First Amendment, freedom of association. If you're talking about a public school or university, the Constitution applies.
Right.
But there's a federal law called the Equal Access Act, and it was enacted by conservative members of Congress who wanted to ensure that student religious clubs, would be entitled to meet and organize and be visible and have access to
Aha.
the school bulletin board in public schools. If
Hmm.
they were not part of the curriculum, because public schools are not supposed to be teaching religion,
Right.
but students generally have been free to have extracurricular, non-curricular clubs about all kinds of things.
Hmm.
And so our U.S. Congress passed the Equal Access Act to protect the right of students in public schools to organize, the Christian club or the Muslim club or the Jewish club, whatever it may be.
Right.
But that law, because it's about the equal access, meant that students could create GSAs. Not anything that the sponsors of that law would have had in mind or would have wanted to support,
Yeah.
but equal is equal for everybody. Yeah.
That
So
really
there's
is
there's an
delicious.
example.
That's a good word for it.
Yeah.
uh, yeah, to talk a little bit about the anxiety and fear that I think a lot of people are feeling right now. It does feel like we are, backsliding maybe around some of these issues. And I'm curious how you all are doing, like how you're faring emotionally, how you are getting up every day and going to work and fighting against all of these awful things that are happening, because I think that that's something that, everybody, regardless of what they do in their day to day, is struggling with from time to time.
Yeah. No, I think you said it really well. I mean, I think our society and politics tends to go in cycles,
Mm.
but this is a more extreme cycle than anything I've seen in my lifetime. And so, I mean, I think those of us who are participating in pushback in various ways, that's a way you keep your feet on the ground and resist. The we can recognize that a goal is to destabilize, to intimidate, to cause fear, to cause people to despair and give up.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty clear that that's an important part of the goal. Uh,
Yeah.
the phrase shock and awe is used a lot, but clearly that has been the point. And to to use the power of the federal government and federal funding in particular as a sledgehammer.
Mm.
And, our community, our LGBTQ plus community, and in particular trans and non-binary folks and intersex folks, are most directly, explicitly, cruelly targeted.
Yeah.
But, the attacks on the concept of DEI, which is its complete perversion of language. I mean, it is exactly what George Orwell described in 1984, language used for its opposite, repeated enough that people should either think words no longer have any meaning or they have a meaning that it didn't have before, whatever. So I think participating in whatever way makes sense for a person can make all the difference in recognizing that actually the resistance movement is growing every day. And the lower federal courts are tending to do their job and say, no, this administration is acting in ways that are unlawful and issuing injunctions. That's a confirmation that what we're saying is true. Then the abuse of power is wrong. And even though some of the appellate courts and the Supreme Court in particular, the Supreme Court is really failing.
Yeah.
And they're not fooling anybody in saying, oh, well, just for now, we'll let the administration do what they want to do. We're not deciding the merits, but we're going to give an emergency order that they get to proceed to do things for which there will be no real remedy later. So they've turned the procedural rules on their head, and that could make us, could leave us discouraged, could leave us saying, well, what's the point if the Supreme Court is going to disregard the rules, if the administration is going to laugh and gleefully violate the rules? What's the point of us trying to operate within a legal system? Well, in my view, it's ever more important that we call out what the rules are and that they're being violated and that it's causing harm and that we have the evidence. And those that are inflicting cruelty and abusing their office, that's wrong. And the courts continue to be a forum for doing that. And it's our job as lawyers in particular to point out what's wrong about what's going on here and what the likely consequences are down the road and why absolutely everybody has a stake in insisting on the rule of law and getting this madness contained back into a system of rules that apply equally to everyone. I look around and I see the resistance, as I said, growing every moment and people participating in all kinds of different ways that, I think we've had periods in our history of the American public kind of standing up and saying, this isn't okay with me. This isn't what was promised. This isn't what we learned. And I'm not going to buy the lies.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you clearly have such belief, and I think very well-founded belief that people on the whole do want to follow the rules and they do want to stand up for what's right. And and there is a political cycle that occurs, these things ebb and flow, and that we're in one of those moments where people are feeling more afraid to stand up maybe than they have previously, or just simply the noise from the right is so loud that it's hard to find those pockets of hope. And I think something I think a lot about is visibility and just the fact that, being visibly queer, having us in the courts, in TV, in music, whatever it is so significant just to kind of keep the public on our side, for lack of a better way of putting it. Because I think we've seen the counterattack really have an effect when it comes to acceptance of trans and non-binary people. I think that the right has really made inroads there in terms of turning the public against a group of people that, I don't think that most people actually, if they thought about it for a second, would have an issue with. And so you mentioned court advocacy earlier and just, Lambda being an impact group. And I'm curious how you were thinking about visibility these days and information in general and the flow of information and kind of how you are making people aware of when the rules are being broken and what you feel like is working and really landing with folks.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's many different movements are facing a challenge that information systems are separate. People are getting their information from their chosen sources. And to use the overused metaphor of silos, I think it
Mm-hmm.
makes it harder that there isn't as much shared media and fact checking and commitment to high quality journalistic principles and how hard it is for people to make a living as a journalist now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I do think that the work that you're doing of telling stories that are relevant and bring out issues to prompt people to be entertained, but also to think, and connecting people to different ideas and some conversation in a way that is not polemical. It's sharing, it's conversation is really important. Where we have a public that's fractured and polarized, and lots of people are scared and angry, and sometimes angry is easier to deal with than fear, just with our psychology,
Yeah, that's
you
very true.
right? So one thing I would say is that our community, with all the different people that make up our community, there have been these particular cycles of targeting us and using us for political purposes.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think about Anita Bryant, or I'm in California, John Briggs. So in the 70s, when we first started getting some local non-discrimination protection, some gay rights ordinances, and the pushback that was used against us and got some of them blocked or repealed was gay men are sexual predators preying on children, child sexual predators. And it was a pernicious lie. And it played on the fact that lots of gay men were closeted because of social stigma and discrimination and the lack of protections against discrimination, whether it for jobs or housing or anything in public life, and including violence. Um,
Mm.
and so people were closeted for good reasons, but it becomes that reinforcing cycle, because if we don't come out and dispel the lies, we can be lied about. And then we're fearful and we have to hide. And so I think part of what happened in the 80s as AIDS had this impact, and it outed people who had been closeted, and
Mm.
called on our community to come together and to build our own institutions, including healthcare institutions and community centers, to provide the kind of care that the rest of society was not providing, was shunning us. And it had the same idea of contagion, and whether it was
Mm.
being gay is contagious, or having AIDS is contagious, or HIV is contagious. And then we saw the same kind of thing as we were doing the family protection, relationships, marriage work. Was,
Mm.
oh, again, the children will be harmed if same-sex couples can marry. And lots of people didn't know any better, and they had sort of just their own idea that maybe that heterosexual couples are probably better parents. Well, it turns out not true, but we had
No.
to do the research and do the public education, and the issue was used by the Bush 2 campaign in 2004 as a get out the vote tactic, which demonized
Mm.
people, but drove, if I remember correctly, it was a dozen states amended their state constitution to lock us out of the family code and marriage. And it was a
Really?
political tactic. And now we're seeing the same thing again about trans folks, gender identity,
Mm-hmm.
and trans kids in particular, where the argument again is protect the children, but now it's protect the children from their own parents and their pediatricians, because they don't really know who
Yeah.
they are. And it's all this contagion of kids hanging out together and they're all deciding that they're trans. That is utter nonsense.
Yeah.
But, they're, like, in the name of parents' rights, they're taking away parents' rights. It's so hypocritical, but it
Yeah.
is another version of what we've seen cyclically before, and it helps me, and it's something from having studied some of our history and experienced some of our history. Oh yeah, They do this to us every time they can. You know, the Trump campaign poured millions. I mean, I think it was a couple $100 million into campaign ads demonizing transgender folks. I mean, it's unconscionable, and it just means the the amount of public education and engagement and conversations that we need to have is that much more, because we have to you know, because we had arguments about restroom access and school programs and clubs and so forth some years ago, and people were not scared about having trans folks use the
Yeah.
appropriate restrooms, right? We defeated those things, but
Yep.
now we're seeing them pass, and some of them are just outrageously unreasonable and cruel, and creating all sorts of risks for everybody. I mean, gender policing just everybody. So one thing I would say about this is I've always thought it's kind of the magic special sauce of who we are is that we're everywhere. We're in every
Mm.
community. We're in families everywhere, every faith tradition, because we're everywhere.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and so, you know, I think it creates the opportunity to connect. And that's very much what we did see in the marriage movement. I mean, I when we won, or as we were winning, I sometimes was asked to be on panels invited by some sort of sibling movements. How did you get
Mm.
this overnight success on marriage? And I was like, yeah, overnight after 40 years of work.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's certainly, we have to have that in mind as we introduce American society, and really it's global now.
Mm.
You know, the demonization of trans folks is an extreme right wing tactic being done
Yeah.
globally,
Yeah.
and so, you know, we have to remember that it took a minute to educate folks about same sex couples and who's a good parent and who isn't, and gay and bisexual men, and you know, what is our sexuality as queer people. No, it's not contagious. It's fabulous, but sorry, not
Yeah.
contagious.
We can't give it to you.
You know, if you didn't get it, oh well.
You don't have
um,
it.
you don't have it. But so that kind of, but I feel like the the speed at which things are happening, and this is connects to very long answer to your question about the
No, I
moment we're
love it.
in. You know, the aggression and the magnitude of what is being done to our society by this administration, by cutting off funding to medical research, to social science programs, to medical services, to, you know, the attempt to censor and dictate what can be taught as our history, or, you know, what can be said in public schools. It's all being done at once in a way that is deliberately disorienting. Um,
Mm.
and I just hope, together with the bonkers climate and bonkers tariff policies, the fact that so much nonsense is being done at once, really brutalizing nonsense is being done at once,
Yeah.
means that anybody who cares about anything has to wake up. Um, and
Yeah.
that may be a blessing in disguise, because sometimes, you know, that really important, um, it's not an aphorism, but idea of, you know, one group being picked off and people don't stand up because they're not targeted, and the next picked off, and you know, to the if it's done gradually, it can be harder for people to recognize that the threat is to all of us and having a
Right.
functioning society that's based on what is true, and being able to live together and progress as a society together. So I don't think it's a Pollyanna stretch to say
Yeah.
that, you know, the magnitude of what's being done, and the impact on everybody may end up being key to bringing an end to this horror.
I think that's so well put and such a good perspective. Something I'm thinking about as you were speaking is the tension between how quickly things can change and also how long it takes to make real, lasting, concrete change. thinking about how the sentiment on transgender people shifted so much in the last 10 years in the wrong direction gives me hope that maybe we can shift it back just as quickly. And I think that we've seen that a little bit with the country's response to the immigration policies that are being enacted, right? All of these people who wanted this to happen are now seeing the level of cruelty in which it's being carried out, and it's terrible. And anybody who is sane can agree that it's terrible. And yeah, I like thinking that maybe because there are so many awful things happening at once that everybody can kind of pick their lane and pick the thing that they really care about and just really, really pursue it. And if somebody wanted to support what Lambda is doing, what's a way that somebody who's not a lawyer could potentially do that?
Well, I mean, first I have to say the more resources we have, the more work we can do. And so
Yeah.
we are so grateful. We're a nonprofit. We don't take any government money, and in these days that is a particular blessing.
Yeah.
We're not subject to coercion by this government, by the threat of having our funding pulled or the actuality of the funding being pulled. So financial support is so gratefully appreciated because it allows us to do more. And then, sharing the information that we put out through our website and all our social channels, because we aim to provide Know Your Rights materials with which people can empower themselves. I mean, as they say, knowledge is power. If people have a sense of what their rights are, then people can be less scared. And at a time of feeling like the government is attacking us,
Right.
knowing that we're fighting back and the courts are agreeing with us and they're issuing injunctions. And so some of the policies are stopped. Some of them are not stopped. I mean, we have been able to block the order to shut down gender affirming medical care for young people. So that's in place. We have not succeeded in protecting trans folks who are serving in the military, which is
Mm.
just appalling and
Yeah.
outrageous. There are some successes. People can now update and correct the gender marker on their passport because there's an injunction in place. There are some other things that we haven't been able to stop. So that knowledge can really give some solid ground under people's feet. And so access that material, share it with the people in your life, share it with your own, social media. And that I think is really helpful. And then just find some way to get involved because Lambda Legal's work succeeds more effectively. I mean, we need the entire movement to be rising up, the conversations to be happening, people to be participating in the public education. I mean, I want to say, young trans and non-binary folks are specifically under attack and
Hmm.
scared. And we're living in a time where threats of violence, online attacks, bullying, and worse are real. And so some of my colleagues who are younger, who are genderqueer or trans, are feeling the impacts very personally.
Yeah.
And I remember having some similar feelings in past years when, a dozen states amended constitutions because they think I shouldn't have legal rights.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
it's just skewering,
Yeah.
So I feel like those of us who are older, who are cis, who have some, whatever it is that gives us some greater sense of privilege and safety, have that much more responsibility to step up and to speak out and to do
Mm.
the things that we feel able to do, which can include support for younger folks who are feeling really scared. And, it's not obviously not just trans folks who are feeling scared. I mean, I think, but encouraging people to participate because doing so is so empowering.
Yeah.
And there's my self-interest as a lawyer in saying that because we're more likely, the judges are people too. The decision makers are people
Right.
too. And sometimes they don't want to be too far ahead of where the general public is. And sometimes they just don't understand. And so you never know which conversation you might have with somebody that encourages them or shares an idea, and then they have a conversation with someone else. And somewhere, maybe not very far down the line, is somebody who then the light bulb goes off and they make a different decision that makes a difference. So, and you don't know, but these ripple effects are what makes the change that we all need. And so it's like, come on in, the water's fine, make those ripples.
Well, and I think you're living proof of how empowering it can be. I mean, this is the most hopeful conversation I've had in a minute. And it's because you've dedicated your life to making these changes. And you are, I imagine, grappling with the frustrations of this, all of this daily in a way that a lot of people are not. But you're still very hopeful, I think, about the future. And that gives me a lot of hope and feels empowering for me. And, in terms of other organizations that are giving you hope and that are keeping your fire burning, what else out there is doing that for you?
Well, so as I say, I feel hopeful in part because I have amazing, brilliant, passionately dedicated colleagues at Lambda Legal, and so they're pretty inspiring.
Yeah.
I also have the honor of serving on the board of an organization called Outright International, outrightinternational.org. They have a wonderful website, wonderful social media. They do global LGBTIQ plus human rights. And, more and more, it's just obvious that we are a global family. It's a global movement, and that our opponents have been operating globally as well. And so some of what is being done in the UK, but also in Uganda and Kenya and in Eastern Europe and in a range of places around the world is now coming back to the US, causing greater problems here.
Right.
And so seeing those connections gives me a sense of responsibility to be helpful. We have so many more resources here in the United States, and Outright
Yeah.
is about, and financial resources and regranting, but also knowledge and research and connectivity and the ability to speak to government leaders and a range of ways of partnering with the sometimes quite small and extraordinarily courageous community leaders and activists in other parts of the world where it's seriously dangerous to speak truth and
Yeah.
organize and call out those who use us for political purposes or religious purposes or what have you. So there again, just recognizing that it's a global movement and it's making progress, but the attacks are severe. And to see our U.S. government go from being a champion, a banner bearer for human rights for LGBTIQ plus people globally, to being the opposite,
Yeah.
to fueling the attacks it's frankly nauseating and infuriating. So Outright International, just the work really, truly inspires me. And it's complementary to the advocacy that Lambda Legal does. So.
Absolutely, because as you said earlier, we are everywhere in every part of the world and every part of life. And it's amazing that you are doing this work on so many different levels. Thank you for everything that you do. It's extraordinary. Finally, what is bringing you queer joy right now?
Yeah, well, there are many things, but I have to say that I had an experience just recently that still, when I think about it, it just fills me with joy. My wife and I had the opportunity to be at the Hollywood Bowl for Cynthia Erivo and Adam Lambert's performance with an amazing, extraordinary cast and orchestra of Jesus Christ Superstar. And
That's
it
incredible.
was so queer, and the music was extraordinary. The voices were just, I mean, just extraordinary, and
Yeah.
the passion that both of those leads with other performers who were just brilliant was off the off the scales memorable.
Yeah.
And the audience response at one point after one of the songs that Cynthia Erivo did, where the emotion just filled the entire place, your
Mm.
tears streaming down her face, and it was just like nothing I'd ever seen. And I think she had a 10-minute standing ovation.
Oh my
And,
gosh.
she just held character through it, and yet
Mm.
also was projecting the reality of the character and also herself.
Yeah.
just as an artist and a person, you know. So, oh my goodness. And I was sitting there thinking, I don't know where else this could take place, but I think a lot of places. I think a lot of places, um, but how lucky am I to be here right now?
I'm so glad that you got that experience. I was fortunate enough to see Cynthia Erivo in The Color Purple on Broadway many years ago. And it was a similar kind of experience when she sent, another show about queerness and, starring this incredible, I mean, she's just one of the great voices of our modern age, I think. And yeah, she got about a 5 minute standing ovation after I'm Here, which is a song about accepting yourself and not, bowing in the face of adversity. And so it really is so special when you get to see artists step into those roles or those stories and clearly bring so much of themselves and then share that with their community. And also, crucially, I'm sure that there were lots of straight people at that performance, and how wonderful for them to see also queer artistry on display in such a way. So I'm really, really happy that you got to be there. And I will admit, I'm also jealous.
Well, there were so many aspects of it because, of course, it was queer joy, but it was also the gender and race
Yeah.
dynamics. And to have Adam, who, is so tall, and then he wears these shoes that make him even taller, as a white man towering over Cynthia as a quite tiny Black woman,
Yeah.
and the power of both performances. It just felt like the possibility of transformation and truth
Hmm.
is there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and I guess I want to close by making a pitch for learning more about our history,
Mm.
because that is an important part of what I feel is giving me right now in this terrifying moment a sense of perspective and some confidence, and confidence about Lambda Legal's work, confidence about who we are as a society. I know folks, you can see I have this book behind me,
Yes, in
that
the video version of this, you'll be able to see the amazing book.
well, you know, our lives are so busy. There's so many types of information bombarding us, and people can often think that law is just for lawyers, and I wouldn't understand that. But my co-author and I put together this book, which is a coffee table book. It's a picture book, and it does have more words than many coffee table books. It has a lot more pictures than you ever have in a book about law, and we wrote it to be accessible to everyone, to be accurate enough for lawyers who know these cases
Hmm.
and accessible for people with zero knowledge about the law. But our law in this country it's about it's about freedom and equality, and that we are intended to have a system of laws that apply equally to everyone, that give us protection and freedom, and freedom to participate as equals in our government and in our society. I think the the process of writing the book was pretty difficult because we have 50 years worth of cases and
Yeah.
stories to tell. But it brings forward that these cases that we do are about people who are deciding to stand up, and they're
Mm.
able to, which not everybody can, and that their stories are powerful, agents of change. And we get to amplify their stories and tell their stories, and they get to tell their stories. And that's how we connect things up for people, and we make the change that we all deserve to have. So I do encourage people to, if they're up for it, making the case for equality is generally available, and it's pretty accessible, and I think it gives people a sense of hope.
Absolutely. That's so beautifully put. It's so important for us to know where we're from so that we can get where we want to be going. And yeah, once again, that book is Making the Case for Equality, 50 Years of LGBTQ History. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me about your truth and all the work that you do. I'm so grateful to you and to Lambda Legal. And I'm so excited to learn more about Outright as well. For people who want to learn more about all of those organizations, you can check the show notes and we'll have links to everything. Go follow Lambda Legal on all of their socials. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really lovely to speak with you.
Well, thank you. This was a pleasure.
Hey folks, Lauren Shippen here, head of Atypical Artists. And today I'm very excited to say that I have not just one audio drama recommendation for you, but a whole collection of audio drama recommendations for you. Hug House Productions is a podcast collective that focuses on spotlighting stories by and about marginalized groups. While their specialty is in fiction, they've also dabbled in documentaries and chat-style podcasts, so you can get a little bit of everything. And here's the rundown on just a few of their fantastic podcasts. You have Valence, a completed urban fantasy audio drama about an oppressed, anxious, cynical magic user learning to believe in himself by rebelling against a billionaire technocrat. So if you're enjoying 2000 and Late, check that out. And if you're looking for something more in the style of Breaker Whiskey, Desperado is a completed road trip audio drama about misfits from all over the world as they try to survive and protect their heritage from modern-day crusaders in a battle of old gods versus new gods. And if you've always thought, well, hey, I love atypical shows, but I wish they had a high fantasy show, well, let me tell you about Levian. It's Hug House's newest audio drama. It just completed its first season, and it is a high fantasy seafaring adventure filled with political intrigue, myths and monsters, and women who can and will kill you. So if you love Game of Thrones and Pirates of the Caribbean, but also thought, hey, those things could be gayer, then Levian should be right up your alley. No matter what you're into or what you're looking for, Hug House has something for you. Check out all of their shows at hughouse.productions.